Once around the park, James, and don't spare the horses.
Do not be alarmed. This is a 5-alarm ugly shirt indeed that I have got on my Friday, and I know you can't see it on the podcast, but if you do want to check it out, you can go to my Twitter feed at Dave Trafford. It is in there. Welcome into On the Ledge. It's the Ontario Politics Podcast. Keith, Leslie, and John Wright. I should have warned you guys to put the shades on this morning. This is the ugliest shirt I have in my wardrobe.
Yes, but fashionably orange. So
yeah, and it's Friday morning.
It's right? Friday morning. So
and
that was one of the things I
used
to do on the radio. Yeah, Friday mornings between Victoria Day and Labor Day, we would wear the ugly shirts. But this shirt has been places. It's been to the big gathering when the Pope came to Canada back on World Youth Day. We did it because the producer on site, the remote guy, wanted to be able to pick me out in a crowd of 4 million people, and he could. So that worked really well. And it's been to Abbey Road. So
there
some
you
history
go.
here. Yeah. So I'm just warning you, if you head to the Twitter feed, you'll see it. All right. We're here to talk about Ontario politics. And, of course, Keith, it has been very difficult to talk about Ontario politics over the last 18 months and not talk about COVID-19. Let me suggest that we begin on what should be a positive note. If we go to the reopening structure that the government has set out, we are now in step 1 in this province. Step 2 is set to go July the 2nd. And in order to do so, we would need to have 70% of the adults in this province with 1 dose of a vaccination and 20% fully vaccinated. By the time I post this podcast, we will blow through those targets 2 weeks early. That, from my perspective, good news. Ontarians have stepped up, and we have done what we've been asked to do. The pressure will be on, whether it's warranted or not, for the Premier now to step in front of the microphone and say, we're going to stage 2 early. We'll not wait the 2 weeks.
They're going to wait the 2 weeks. At best, they might improve it a day or two, as they've said, but I think given the Canada Day holiday, they're going to wait the 2 weeks, especially when we know every time previously they've said, and Dr. Williams has repeatedly told us, we need to wait the 2 weeks to see the actual impact of what we've done here. So once we blow through those numbers, we need to wait 2 weeks to make sure that those numbers stay where they are or keep going down. And remember, Dr. Williams hasn't yet retired. He's still with us for at least another week. So I think he's going to carry the day on this one, and that there will be 2 weeks before we hit stage 2. That's not necessarily a bad thing. People can plan for it. We know it's there. It's within tasting distance at this point. I know there's a lot of pressure on the Premier and everyone to get it open, but I think they're going to have to wait the 2 weeks. We still have outbreaks. There's a big outbreak in Kitchener-Waterloo of the Delta variant, very concerning. And so they're sending some extra vaccines in there. An outbreak in Saskatchewan and James Bay, which is really, really quite tragic. I mean, and how do people self-isolate when there's 18 people living in a house? So apparently some people are sleeping outside in tents and, trying to deal with this massive outbreak there. So while they've got these situations, there's two extremes, James Bay and Kitchener-Waterloo in southwestern Ontario. That's pretty much, two extremes of the province. They're going to have to stay safe and just ride this one out. I think the 2 week protocol is going to stay in effect here, and I think it's a wise thing at this point.
John, I wondered, though, whether or not there might be more conversation around not necessarily the timeline, but when we go into stage 2, or step 2, as they like to say, what we'll be looking at. And that is to say, will they adjust some of the permissions in terms of activities that we'll be allowed to do? For example, limited capacity in indoor dining. Because at this stage, if you do them, trot it all out, it's going to be late July, early August before restaurants are going to be able to have indoor dining. It's been great that we've had the patios, but I talked to lots of restaurant and bar owners who are saying not everybody has that ability. So this is really hurting that industry. Maybe, we can kind of slide them into stage 2.
I don't know the answer to that, because I guess I'm just a little hypersensitive to the Delta variant. And I know we're not getting a lot of coverage of that, but if you every day kind of look through the online sources, you will see that there are more and more areas within the province that are being affected by this significantly. I mean, Waterloo's health authority issued a really stern statement this past week of concern about how it's moving through that community at a really big rate. So I guess I think of this in two ways. Number one is that the government got into trouble when it started to move things around before, and it was sooner rather than later, and there was an outbreak and the government was wearing it. And so even though they've set the thresholds that we will probably surpass for that opening sooner, I think we've got to keep, a mind's eye on that other variant that is now starting to touch on a lot of people. So I guess from a communications point of view, and I'm not trying to suggest that the government become alarmist in this, but you're just not hearing about all the outbreaks of the Delta. That's an excuse. I mean, if we're, a week from now and it's now, and it's getting into other communities and it really is taking off like it is in other countries, then I think that gives the government the opportunity to put some, speed limiters on this. But right now, I think sticking to the schedule as Dr. Williams wants to do is probably the best thing.
But let me point out, too, I mean, when we talk about the variants, and we hear the public health officials in Waterloo, they specifically say that there's the outbreak in congregate communities, particularly homeless shelters, where people first are not vaccinated, and they are spreading it to people who are not vaccinated. So, the strategy clearly worked in Peel and Toronto to get the second doses and the doses into the hotspots. Declaring Waterloo a hotspot, for example, might solve some of that problem. So I guess where we go is, was it a week ago we were talking about modeling numbers that said exactly what you've said, John? We're going to see the Delta variant become the dominant variant very quickly. At the same time, it's not a doomsday scenario. So it's, given everything we've been through, it's really hard to balance that off, though, isn't it?
Well, it is, but I think if I were managing this, and it seems like they are doing it in the same way, I think prudence is the word. I think, you just got to take it a day at a time, and while you may, the green light may be shining brightly on one side of the cockpit, but on the other side there might be a yellow caution light, and so I think that's kind of what you have to do right now.
Dave, one thing you mentioned in passing was, the restaurant patios. And I read a disturbing story Friday morning that apparently a lot of people, just in the patios, and I suspect this could happen again when they actually get to in-room dining, groups are booking multiple appointments and then not canceling or canceling at the last minute. So a lot of patios were half empty or more than half empty this weekend because, 5 or 6 people would each book a patio, and then when they would all decide where they would go, they would stiff the other 3 or 4 places they'd booked. The restaurants that have suffered so much, this is just unconscionable. I just want to caution people that, for goodness sakes, it's one thing to book a space and make sure you get one, but if you're not going to need or use that space, call them as early as you can in advance so someone else can. They're at limited capacity. They've been hurting for 14 or 15 months, and really, it's just such a wrong thing to do. It's almost as bad as double booking vaccines and not canceling your second appointment, and that leads us into our next discussion. Dave, there, I gave you a segue.
Well, yeah, exactly. So we end up with the vaccines, and I'll tell you the story. So yesterday, I was all excited. Thursday of this week, I'm all in line to get my second dose. 2:00 in the afternoon, off I go. Pharmacy's all ready for me. Fill out the form. Everything. The longest wait I had was the 15-minute sit down after they give you the vaccine. This is terrific. When I walk out the door, John, they gave me my certificate. I felt like it should have been a cap and gown affair. I was waiting for them to play Pomp and Circumstance as I left the pharmacy because it was just felt like I had graduated. I am here. I get in the car, turn on the radio, and I hear on News Talk 1010 that NACI has decided that if you've got the first dose vaccine is AstraZeneca, the second dose should be Pfizer or Moderna. And I'm thinking, really? The Band-Aid has barely stuck to my arm here. But I thought, to hell with it, I'm okay. I'm just going to move this on. But what I had done is I had called another pharmacy in the neighborhood earlier to see whether or not I could get an appointment there. They put me on a waiting list. So on the way home, I was just going to stop in and say, I got my shot. Listen, take me off the list, whatever, because they hadn't bothered to call me yet. I got 2 blocks away from the drugstore. My phone rings. Hi, it's so-and-so calling from the Shoppers Drug Mart. We've got you on the list here, and we can get you a Pfizer shot if you wanted to. Now, I don't know whether or not, if that whole thing had been reversed, I would have said yes. NACI says take Pfizer. get the Pfizer call, I would have taken that appointment or not. I don't know. But when I talked to Dr. Mitch Schulman on News Talk 1010, he said, you know what? 2 doses is what you want. And what he found was really interesting about the NACI thing was they have said that it prompts your immune system to be more active if you get the Pfizer or Moderna after AstraZeneca. But they cannot prove that you're any better off necessarily one way or the other. Now, it may be that we eventually get to that point because we'll have more data to look at. But all of this noise around it, John, somebody on one of the roundtables this morning with me on the radio said, okay, once this is all over, we need to shut down NACI because it is a complete, utter failure.
Yeah, and they had paused the AstraZeneca, and I'm one of those people who got it. I was very diligent. I booked online when it first was available in the pharmacies. I was one of the very first there, so I was one of the very first to get the second dose. And, I also was excited to get that second dose, but it's been 3 weeks since I had it. And you got to wonder whether or not, before we all launch back into the pause of this, that NACI could have said something. I mean, it doesn't evolve over 3 weeks that you've got this concern. And I'm not a big Bruce Springsteen fan, so it wouldn't bother me going to the United States. But you know what, Dave? If I'd been getting that phone call from you, I might have just gone to the pharmacy and got that extra Pfizer shot stuck in my arm. I don't know what it's going to be to have 3 doses. But what it's done is created 2 classes of people in this country. And it's going to be very interesting because then people say, well, what are you going to show when you go across the border? My wife got the Astra, but she's going to end up with a Pfizer or Moderna shot in the next couple of weeks. And when she gets her certificate, it's not going to say Astra/Moderna. It's going to say just Moderna. I mean, does that mean that she can get across the border and I can't? I mean, part of this is the communication aspect to it, but the other part of it is simply, undermining the confidence that we have in the whole system. I don't know how many people now are not going to show up in Ontario to their shots that they would have had for the next couple of weeks, or whether they're going to go ahead with it. But I just find it an incredible thing to go through with the communication. I would have hired Mitch Schulman to be their speaker and get rid of these clowns.
The uncoordinated communications on all of this, and this seems to be the group that sticks it in. Just as things are getting churning and we're getting along, we're going, okay, we figured out what we're doing. These guys stick their head up and say, you know what? No, we're going to clarify this or we're going to fine-tune that. In this particular instance, it's upsetting to people. It's confusing people. As you say, it's scaring people away. Coordinate with the public health unit. Coordinate with whoever we need to. And just, don't be firing these messages off at random so that they all seem to have their own say. Each has input in the message. So it comes across as a coordinated message because right now it comes across as uncoordinated. And Dave, I'm really pleased to hear your longest wait was the 15 minutes after the shot. But our friend Amber Mack yesterday posted she lined up for 5.5 hours in a park in Leslieville to get her second shot. Now, she's a young, healthy woman and can do that. But how many people can stand for 5.5 hours in a park to get a shot? Not a lot. And how many people are being forced to stand in these lines? We see them all over the place. That's in Leslieville. We see them in Scarborough. We see them all over the GTA. That kind of lineup is just so unnecessary and could have been avoided, especially as you say, you went in. You were in and out. The longest wait was getting you the post 15-minute safety period. That's the way it should be for everyone. Certainly was my experience. I get my second shot on Tuesday. If I wanted to stay with the second as an AstraZeneca, I would have had to wait the previous till mid-July is my previous appointment. But I'll be getting Pfizer on Tuesday, and I'm quite comfortable with that. And hopefully, they will stamp my COVID passport as Pfizer so that I can go see Springsteen on Broadway. It's not that so much, but I fear that kind of craziness in a rule will expand across the United States, which never approved AstraZeneca. Mm. And that might mean Disneyland's out too. And, I can handle this. But I just, it's that kind of stupidity. Are we going to get stopped at the border with AstraZeneca? Isn't a real vaccine? We didn't approve it here. Those sorts of things need to be worked out with, they talk about opening the border. There's an issue I'd like to see hammered out before the border is open.
But the one thing about our discussion right now is we're not talking about Doug Ford and the government. I mean,
I am. He's to blame for the 5-hour lineup for Amber Mack yesterday. That's absolutely on him.
Well, really? It's not the local health authority. It's not. I mean,
you're going to come to local health. They punted all of these to every local health authority.
I understand that, but if you look at what we've just talked about now, there's not a full-scale attack on the Doug Ford government that there would have been 2 months ago or even a month ago. And so, I mean, the communication strategy, all those sort of things, has taken the air out of the tire, and, you know, people are moving on and they're getting their shot. So I don't disagree with you about the lineups, and, you know, we're looking this morning on the television and there's big lineups in the rain of people, you know, thousands of people trying to get their shot, which is all good. They're all going out to get it. But I don't hear the level of criticism that there was 30 days ago about the provincial government. And instead, we're talking about NACI and getting across the border and stuff like that, where we would have been howling at the moon, you know, not too long ago. So again, coming back to the provincial side of this, I'm not seeing the government getting blamed here for those lineups or for those. I'm just not seeing it and hearing it. And that, you know, for a government that was under siege not too long ago, that's not a bad thing. I mean, from a communications point of view.
So just before we move on, I just want to just take the opportunity to put a bit of a mid-roll note in here. We mentioned it a few weeks ago that I'm launching a new podcast. For those of you who are interested in this one, you might be interested in one we're going to launch in early mid-July, and it's called The Next Normal. And it will, in fact, deal with many of the things that we're talking about right now, the lessons learned from COVID-19, and some of the big questions in terms of how we get back to work. How do we manage education for our kids? What about women in the workplace? All of these big issue questions that sound too big to kind of bite off and chew on, they're going to be in front of us before we know it, and we're going to have to deal with them. So we have assembled a pretty great crew to come in on the roundtable, and everything from a city planner to a woman who's an expert in future of work. We have a cultural anthropologist who uses AI to sort of read the trends out there. And finally, a woman who is a behavioral researcher and informs government policy. So we've got quite a range of views to bring the sort of a three-dimensional perspective to some of these big issues. So watch for it. I'll let you know. It's called The Next Normal, because this won't be new. Every couple of weeks, every couple of months, we're going to be into another normal here in the lives in the COVID era. So that's on the way. Anyway, coming up, and it's all part of an adventure I'm actually doing with my daughter. It's called the Story Studio Network. So, all right, let's shift gears here just because, well, let's get back to Ontario politics, and really Ontario politics. They are starting their campaigning already. It's the unofficial campaign. We spent a lot of time talking last week about restricting spending, and Doug Ford went ahead and passed that bill with the minor adjustment using the notwithstanding clause. But the NDP is already out there, all set to spend some money on ads. And I think it might have been you, John, that mentioned earlier that, you know, what you want to do in politics is make sure that you define your opponent sooner than later. And that's exactly what the NDP has done this week, targeting Stephen Del Duca.
This guy, he's got to go. But this guy thinks the job belongs to him. You might not remember his name, but you'll never forget his record as Kathleen Wynne's right-hand man, making big cuts and bad choices together, slashing healthcare, and sending your hydro bill through the roof. Now he wants to be premier, to do it all again. Stephen Del Duca, back for power, not for you.
So what they have done here is just taken a shot at Del Duca, and you can't see the video, obviously, but they've got this split screen set up, Keith, and I thought it was brilliant, where they've got Del Duca. It looks like he's waiting to do a media hit, so he's just sitting in front of a camera, and he's, blinking kind of oddly, and then sort of nodding away, and they have timed it so that it looks like he's agreeing with all the shots they're taking at him. I think it's a brilliant piece of media.
It's really well done. The NDP launched sort of a two-prong attack here, or a two-prong ad campaign for the election. This one that defines, as you say, Del Duca for himself, because no one really knows who he is, and then they have that split screen with him. You say, look like he's waiting on a Zoom call, but as he blinks and nods, he seems to be agreeing with their things that he really wants this job. He's not for all that sort of stuff. And then they have another set of ads as well that is just features Andrea Horvath sitting in a kitchen, and they're the positive vision ads. There's a couple of 15-seconders and a 30-second that they just said, you want a premier that works for you, that thinks about you. Doesn't really name for it at all, doesn't go after Del Duca in any stretch, just presents her as a premier, a positive vision ad. But then these ones, way more effective. Mm-hmm. And of course, the use of the notwithstanding clause, and I must apologize to both of you. You were right, I was wrong. There is no massive public outcry other than the Laurentian elites. Can I use that? Or anyway, the chattering classes that most people could have cared less that it's done. And I think actually Premier Ford did a really good job selling that. We just don't want super PACs controlling our elections up here. I don't think that was the reality of it, but it was a good way of selling what he had done, and it flew. So where are we at now? The NDP have got their ads out. The NDP, by the way, they boasted this week in Elections Ontario, confirmed they've got the most money in the bank. They got $6 million in the bank and no debt. The PCs have about $5 million, and the Liberals are back at like $2.5 million. So the NDP are starting to spend that money and spend it now, and wisely so. They're going to define Del Duca because the Liberals were actually rather flattered by that, and their campaign director, Christine McMillan, fought right back. Nice to see you spending so much time on us, but we think the enemy is Doug Ford. All of this is, of course, to show that it's going to be a really tight three-way race. And in the end, if they really want to stop Doug Ford from having a second term, those two parties are going to end up in the end having to work together. But I don't see it happening until after the actual vote is cast.
Well, John, we had actually been talking a couple of weeks ago about what it would take in terms of a campaign posture, and that the negatives around COVID were going to take care of themselves. That in fact, whether it was the attack ads from special interest groups or whatever it might be, that was going to be somebody else was going to carry that water. That it would be effective for one of the opposition parties to say, "Here's what our vision is, and here's how we are envisioning Ontario in the next 10 years generationally." And it sounds like Andrea Horvath and the NDP are at least considering that tack, that they have gone out and determined that they will get some positive response from that.
Well, sure. And in politics, it's paint the other guy's wagon before he gets a chance to do so. And the Liberal Party in Ontario is pinned down below the ridge with no ammunition. They have no money to spend. They've been running a virtual campaign to try and get their policies out. And in fact, at the same time, they fired, a salvo that nobody really heard. And it was, we're going to, hire more mental health teachers, and we're going to help we're going to put money back into the school system. And it just kind of whisked away. I haven't read the new legislation at all. It's not something that keeps me up at night. But it seems to me that if you're going to limit $600,000 worth of spending to each individual group during the year leading up to an election campaign, and let's be clear, in the last election in Ontario, collectively these groups spent $5 million, a third basically of all the other parties. So it's not a small amount of money. But I'd be hard pressed not to be musing about starting a whole bunch of these little groups and maybe spending $600,000 attacking the Liberals just on the side. There's ways in which you can skin the cat here, but I really do believe that Andrea Horvath coming out of the gate the way she did is exactly the way in which you start to position yourself. And I don't think the Liberals have the money, and I don't think they have the ability to paint their own wagon at this point. And I think Andrea Horvath will be delighted if she can have a runoff between her and the Premier. I'm not sure how successful that's going to be, because you got to win the 905 and all of this, and the Premier's got more of an edge there. But I don't know where the Liberals are going to be without any money to spend on this sort of stuff and to move forward.
Well, the Tories, Keith, have already started to build the planks for the platform, so they're getting ready.
Oh, absolutely. This week they announced that, CTV reported rather, that Rod Phillips, the former finance minister, Paul Calandra, the House leader, and Kinga Surma, a backbench PC MPP, will be the three responsible for crafting a costed-out election platform before the campaign next year. They're going to be doing some consulting on that. That's really important for the Conservatives. It's laying out. We're into campaign mode now. There's just no two ways about it. The NDP are already out advertising. The Tories are fundraising more than they're advertising on their slides against the other parties. But we're at that stage. And as John just rightly pointed out, where are the Liberals in this at this point? Mm-hmm. They're trying to hold their dollars. And, hopefully, I guess, in their point of view, if they can get Del Duca out to actually meet people, but with the COVID restrictions right now, that's not possible. So he's just a character in a Zoom chat for almost all the people he's meeting. So unless you're a diehard Liberal to begin with, chances are you haven't had much interaction with Stephen Del Duca. and the news media are paying him scant attention, basically because there's just so much going on with COVID and the other politics. I venture most people aren't even aware of those NDP ads yet, even though they've launched into them, because it's just COVID is dominating everything. So for Mr. Del Duca to try and get his name out there with having half the money that the other leading parties have to go against him, and none of the profile at all, despite having been a cabinet minister himself, it's just a massive uphill battle. The other hand, there is a massive core of support, not massive, but a huge core of support in Ontario. 20 to 30% of people are diehard Liberals. So he's got that as a base to build on, but can he build on it when he's stuck in home doing Zoom conference calls?
Well, I thought it was interesting when you talk about the Tory platform that it's going to be costed. And wasn't that an issue in the last campaign where the Conservatives came up with their platform, but were really kind of fuzzy around what exactly it was going to cost us if we
didn't really have a
Ford
platform, did
government?
they? Had a few ideas, I thought. They didn't really come up with a platform.
Yeah.
They certainly didn't cost any of their ideas.
No.
And it was all put down to, well, geez, Doug only got the job a couple of months ago. We're just rolling into this thing. And so and it was obviously some conscious decisions on their part not to do that. They didn't need to run on ideas that would come back and bite them in the arse. So they didn't. That time it worked. This time you're a government that's running on your record. So you better have some policies and ideas. And you can tout some of your record as well. And, right now even they're fighting back when I complain about the vaccine lines and say, the vaccine rollout's been screwed up by the Ford government. They come right back with, 200,000 people a day are being vaccinated. What's wrong with that? That's not a screw up. And they're right. That's a huge number. So there are absolutely positives and negatives. And, my job has always been to look for what the government isn't doing right, but we should point out when they are doing it right, and they're getting massive amounts of people vaccinated, but I still don't think they should be going through those kinds of lineups.
Well, John, one of the challenges that Mr. Del Duca has, somebody this morning said he looks like a B film version of a Bond villain, and that's kind of the image that the memes are going to be out there, right? And you talk about paid advertising, that's going to be the kind of thing that kills a guy, right? It's Robert Stanfield in the football.
Yeah, and John Lassinger threw that football to him up in Sault Ste. Marie about 4 times before he dropped it on the last try. The biggest issue that you have with, again, Mr. Del Duca is he controls nothing. He's not in the legislature. He doesn't have a seat. They don't have much money to get his profile up. And much to your point, Dave, if he's not portrayed as being kind of attractive and out among people, then he's going to get characterized. And I think it's going to be even a bigger struggle if they're not spending the money up front to get him out among people and shaking hands. But you can't even do that nowadays. So it's a whole different thing. The NDP, in fact, are now setting the stage for what looks like almost a 2-party showdown at the polls. But as I said, we've got a long way to go before that happens.
Yeah, and we expect fully within the next few weeks, things will get settled down. We'll be into step 2, and I wonder how long it'll be after that we get the, by the way, we're shuffling the cabinet.
I hear maybe today.
Way.
I've just had a message that it may be coming as soon as today. So keep your eye out for the cabinet shuffle.
All right. Well, we better post this so that we can get it up and before the premier pulls the pin on the on the cabinet and shuffles the whole thing out from underneath our feet. Keith, Leslie, John Wright, have a great weekend. I'm Dave Trafford. This is On the Ledge. It's the Ontario Politics Podcast. It's an eye contact podcast.